Why me? Why now? Why can't anything go right? Jack whispered to himself as he stared at the glowing laptop screen. The words, "We regret to inform you," cut through him like a knife. It was the fifth rejection email he had received that month, and each one seemed heavier than the last. He had poured hours into preparing resumes, writing cover letters, and convincing himself, this time will be different. But once again, the answer was no. The small apartment he lived in felt darker that evening, even though the lamp beside him was still on. The silence was loud, broken only by the faint hum of his old ceiling fan. His rent was due, the bills stacked on the table looked like an army he could never defeat, and his fridge was almost empty. Jack pressed his palms against his tired face, feeling the weight of not just failure but hopelessness. His phone buzzed with notifications. Pictures of friends on vacations, co-workers celebrating promotions, people smiling in restaurants he couldn't afford. Instead of being happy for them, he felt a sharp sting of jealousy and defeat. Why is everyone moving forward except me? He thought. Jack had once been full of dreams. He imagined himself building a successful career, traveling the world, and helping his parents live a better life. But now, those dreams felt like a cruel joke. The harder he tried, the further they seemed to slip away. He remembered his father's words from years ago, "Son, tough times don't last, but tough people do." But in that moment, Jack didn't feel tough. He felt broken. He lay back on his bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with thoughts that scared him. Maybe I should just stop trying. Maybe I'm not meant for more. Maybe life just isn't going to change for me. This is where many people give up. The breaking point is not always about dramatic events. It's about those quiet, lonely nights where everything feels pointless. Jack was standing at that dangerous crossroad, where one decision, whether to keep going or give up, could change his life forever. What he didn't realize was this: the darkest moments often come right before life begins to shift. That rejection, that silence, that hopelessness, it wasn't the end. It was a test. A painful, crushing test designed not to destroy him but to prepare him. Jack didn't know it yet, but this very night, when he felt weakest, was the night life would plant the first seed of change. Because sometimes, inspiration arrives not as a lightning bolt, but as a quiet spark, something so small you might almost miss it. But if you catch it, it can transform everything. And for Jack, that spark was just around the corner. That night, unable to sleep, Jack reached for his phone. He scrolled aimlessly through social media, drowning in the highlight reels of other people's lives. But then, almost by accident, he came across a short video. It was Mel Robbins, speaking with that no-nonsense energy that made people stop and listen. In the clip, she said something simple yet powerful. You are never going to feel like it. Motivation will not save you. If you want to change your life, you have to take action, even when you don't feel ready. That's why I use the 5-second rule: count backward, 5-4-3-2-1, and move. Don't think, just act. Jack paused. He replayed the video. It wasn't the first time he had heard motivational advice. In fact, over the past months, he had watched dozens of inspirational talks, read countless quotes, and even tried journaling to fix his mindset. Nothing had stuck. But there was something raw and practical about Mel's words. It wasn't sugar-coated. She wasn't telling him to just be positive. She was telling him to interrupt his own excuses. Jack sat up in bed. Could it really be that simple? Just count backward and move before his brain found a reason to stop him? The next morning, his alarm rang at 6:30. His first instinct, as usual, was to hit snooze and bury his head under the blanket. But then he remembered the video. He whispered to himself. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And instead of snoozing, he swung his legs off the bed. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't suddenly feel like a new man. But for the first time in weeks, he had won the battle against his own excuses. That small victory mattered. He made coffee, sat at his desk, and applied for a new job. Later, he pushed himself to go for a short run, even though he hated exercise. He wasn't fast, his body ached, and he wanted to quit halfway. But again, he counted 5-4-3-2-1, and pushed through one more block, then another. By the end of the day, Jack noticed something unusual. He felt alive. Not successful, not rich, not on top of the world, but alive. He had done things he normally would have avoided. And that gave him a strange new confidence. Over the next week, he kept testing the rule. He used it to stop procrastinating, to make uncomfortable phone calls, to open emails he was afraid to read. Each time, it was hard. Each time, his mind screamed for the easier path. But every time he counted down and acted, he felt a small spark. What Jack didn't realize was this: the 5-second rule wasn't about magic. It was about rewiring his brain. It was a tool to break free from the loop of overthinking and hesitation that had trapped him for months. And slowly, those tiny sparks began to add up. Jack wasn't fixed. His life was still messy, bills still unpaid, rejection still real. But for the first time, he had proof that change was possible. All it required was courage for 5 seconds. That night, as he lay in bed, Jack whispered to himself, "Maybe I don't need to quit after all. Maybe I just need to keep moving." He didn't know it yet, but this small spark of action was the first step in building a fire that could carry him through the darkest storms of his life. For a while, Jack felt unstoppable. Every morning, he pushed himself out of bed with the 5-4-3-2-1 rule. He applied to more jobs, sharpened his resume, and even started learning new skills online. He was eating better, moving his body, and trying to think positively. The small sparks were building into something bigger. But life has a way of testing you just when you start to believe things are getting better. 2 weeks later, Jack received another rejection. Then another. And another. Each email hit harder than the last. The excitement of small wins began to fade, replaced by the same old sting of failure. His savings account was nearly empty, and his landlord had already given him a warning about rent. One rainy evening, Jack sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor. His sneakers, still wet from a jog, sat by the door. He had forced himself to run in the rain, but instead of feeling proud, he felt foolish. What's the point of all this effort if nothing changes? He muttered. The voice in his head grew louder again, the same voice that had once convinced him to give up. See? You tried. You got up early, you worked hard, and still nothing. Maybe you're not good enough. Maybe quitting is smarter than wasting time on a life that doesn't want you. Jack almost listened. Almost. But then he remembered what Mel Robbins had said in another clip he watched. You will never always be motivated. That's why you have to be disciplined. It stung. He realized he had been treating motivation like a fuel tank that needed to stay full. But motivation wasn't permanent. Some days it would be there, some days it wouldn't. What mattered was discipline, the decision to act even when the feeling wasn't there. The next morning, when the alarm rang, Jack didn't want to get up. His body felt heavy. His thoughts were darker than usual. But instead of waiting for inspiration, he whispered the countdown again. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. He dragged himself out of bed. It wasn't graceful, but it was victory. That became his new mindset, progress, not perfection. On the good days, he worked hard and felt strong. On the bad days, he did the bare minimum, but he still showed up. If he couldn't run 3 miles, he walked 1. If he couldn't apply for 5 jobs, he applied for one. If he couldn't study for hours, he studied for 20 minutes. Slowly, Jack realized something powerful: success wasn't about big leaps. It was about consistency through struggle. Each small action was a brick, and though the wall wasn't built yet, he was laying the foundation. Still, the rejections didn't stop. The loneliness didn't vanish. The roadblocks were real. But Jack's perspective began to shift. Instead of seeing obstacles as proof he wasn't good enough, he started to see them as training. Every rejection toughened his skin. Every failure forced him to learn. Every no made the eventual yes worth more. Life hadn't magically turned around yet, but Jack had. He was no longer the man who wanted to quit at the first sign of pain. He was becoming someone who could stand in the storm and keep walking. And that shift, though invisible to the outside world, was the beginning of everything. Months passed. Jack was still grinding, still applying, still pushing himself with the 5-4-3-2-1 rule. He didn't feel like a success yet, but there was something different about him now. He had grown stronger, not because life had gotten easier, but because he had gotten tougher. One cold evening, after another long day of applications and online classes, Jack received a message in his inbox. At first, he braced himself for another rejection. But this time, the words were different. "Hello Jack, we came across your graphic design samples online. We are impressed by your creativity and would like to discuss a small freelance project with you." Jack's heart skipped. For a second, he thought it was a scam. He reread the message over and over. Could it really be a yes? It wasn't a full-time job, not even close. But it was an opportunity, a chance to prove himself, to show that his skills were worth something. The next morning, nervous but determined, Jack called the company. His voice shook at first, but he pushed through. The project was simple: designing a few promotional banners. The pay wasn't much, but the trust they placed in him was priceless. For the first time in months, Jack felt a door crack open. He poured himself into the work, staying up late, sketching ideas, testing colors, making drafts. Every time he felt doubt creeping in, he counted 5-4-3-2-1 and kept going. A week later, he sent the designs. The client loved them. They paid him promptly and even asked if he was open to future work. That small yes became Jack's turning point. From there, more opportunities trickled in. One client recommended him to another. Slowly, his name began to circulate in small online communities. His confidence grew, not because everything suddenly became easy, but because he was finally seeing proof that his persistence mattered. Jack looked back at the months of rejection, the countless nights he almost quit, the mornings where getting out of bed felt like lifting a mountain. And for the first time, he felt grateful for those struggles. Without them, he wouldn't have developed the resilience he now carried. Without the pain, he wouldn't have built the discipline to keep showing up. He realized something life-changing: success doesn't come in a straight line. It comes through storms, failures, detours, and delays. The turning point doesn't arrive when life decides to be kind, it arrives when you refuse to quit, even when life is cruel. Jack's story was still unfolding. He wasn't rich. He wasn't famous. He wasn't living the dream he once imagined. But he was no longer standing still. He was moving forward, one step at a time, fueled not by luck, but by persistence. And deep down, he knew, the man who almost quit was gone forever. The man who remained was unshakable. Jack's story isn't just about him, it's about you, me, and everyone who has ever faced that crushing moment when quitting feels easier than trying again. Because let's be honest, life is hard. It doesn't care about your plans. It doesn't always reward your effort right away. Sometimes it feels like the world is against you, and every door you knock on is locked. That's when most people stop. That's when most people settle. But Jack's journey proves something powerful. Quitting guarantees failure, but persistence keeps the door open for miracles. Think about it. What if Jack had quit on that rainy night when he felt hopeless? What if he had given up after his 10th rejection? He never would have seen the email that changed everything. He never would have discovered his talent was valuable. He never would have realized that discipline, not motivation, was the key to building the life he wanted. The truth is, you don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need to feel confident every day. You don't need to wait for motivation to magically appear. All you need is 5 seconds of courage at a time. 5 seconds to silence the voice of doubt. 5 seconds to take one more step forward. Yes, life will knock you down. You will fail. You will be rejected. You will face setbacks that make you want to scream. But the people who succeed are not the ones who avoid pain, they are the ones who refuse to let pain stop them. Mel Robbins says, "You are one decision away from a completely different life." And that decision isn't made once, it's made daily. Each time you choose action over hesitation, courage over fear, discipline over excuses, you are shaping your future. So, what about you? What is that thing you've been avoiding because it feels too hard, too scary, or too uncertain? Maybe it's applying for a job. Maybe it's starting a business. Maybe it's working on your health, fixing a broken relationship, or finally chasing the dream you've buried for years. Here's the challenge: the next time you feel that hesitation, count down 5-4-3-2-1 and act. Send the application. Make the call. Open the book. Take the first step. It might feel small, but small steps compound into massive change. Remember, Jack didn't transform his life in a day. He didn't leap from hopelessness to success overnight. He built it brick by brick, decision by decision, moment by moment. And if he could rise from his lowest point, so can you. Because in the end, greatness doesn't belong to the smartest or the luckiest, it belongs to the ones who never quit. And that, my friend, can be you. So when life gets hard, and it will, don't stop. Don't fold. Don't surrender. Instead, take a deep breath, count down from 5, and step forward. The future you're dreaming of is waiting on the other side of persistence.